It's always a pleasant surprise to find a Netflix show that's actually good. And I have to say, I really like this show, everything about it. It just came up in my suggested stuff one day, and I just said, oh, it's kind of an interesting premise. Let's watch it. And I was hooked after the first episode, and I just chain watched in a couple days. So I'd really recommend this one if you have Netflix or if you want to, as I say, obtain it from another source. So You is a very it's definitely postmodern. It's kind of like a romance meets a thriller. Probably the closest thing is either Breaking Bad or No Chance. And I'm just going to say it now. No Chance was the initial draft. No Chance was written before the book that this was based on was written, because it is fairly similar in a lot of ways. So the show follows Joe Goldberg, who's the manager of a bookstore called Mooney's that mainly deals with rare and unusual books. They have like a bunch of first editions of like Wuthering Heights and that kind of thing. So Mooney adopted Joe after his parents abused and abandoned him, and raised him to love books and to be a tough person, etc. Mooney, however, is kind of out of the picture because he's in a vegetative state, because he had a stroke that basically scrambled his brain. So Joe, for all intents and purposes, owns and runs the bookstore. And it's kind of where a lot of this stuff takes place throughout the series. So when Joe was raised by Mooney, Mooney was very abusive to him. In the bookstore, they have like this cage in the basement that kind of looks like one of those plastic prison cells in a movie like Deadpool 2 or something like that, which is climate controlled and temperature controlled, and that's where they store the really rare books, as it were. And Mooney would lock him in there for weeks at a time, and he said, you're going to stay in there and read all these like old books until you gain an appreciation for them. So Joe is kind of messed up from that, and he has this very kind of twisted view of love. Like that love is often a very abusive, but in his view, necessary format. And kind of like Walter White or Jeremy, the series kind of follows the whole... There's a way that Vince Gilligan does things that's really good, where... And this was kind of... Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. With regards to Walter White, he took the name Heisenberg in part because the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is you can't know exactly where a particle is at any given time. And it's kind of supposed to reflect you don't know exactly when Walter White crosses the moral horizon. It just kind of happens over the course of the series. Because as with him or Saul Goodman or whoever, individually, most of their decisions are justifiable, especially when you as the viewer get the full context and you see things from their perspective. So, spoiler alert. Okay, there we go. That's the spoiler alert. Joe kills a number of people throughout the show, but we see it from his perspective and they seem largely justified. Most of the people he kills are sociopaths or just like garbage, etc. And you don't really feel bad for them, and you kind of feel it's justified, and you're kind of rooting for him, and you kind of wonder, when does he cross the moral event horizon? Is one of the people he kills someone who really doesn't deserve it, etc. So the kind of the premise of the show is Guinevere Beck comes into his bookstore one day, and they meet, and it's love at first sight, and he develops an obsessive romantic attraction to her. So he begins stalking her. He finds out like what she's interested in. He winds up saving her from an oncoming train, and he steals her phone. And her phone's still logged into the cloud, so he has complete access to all of her text messages and internet browsing activity. So he can kind of predict what she does. And basically, his goal is to make himself into the perfect guy for her, to try to be there to solve her problems, to try to be there to care for her, etc. The issue, though, is Guinevere is a massive thought. She is a horrible person. And even though Joe is like a psychopath, you still sympathize with him. Because him and Guinevere are in a relationship, and she repeatedly cheats on him and breaks up with him and treats him like trash. And really, from your perspective, because you follow Joe's perspective, all he really does is just love her. and do things that benefit her. Like, if we look at the people he killed to try to improve her life, the first one is her douchey boyfriend, who I think he killed a little kid or something. I was a little unsure, but he was like, he killed a little kid. He was a massive drug addict. He was cheating on her. He was a piece of garbage. So you don't really feel bad about him killing that guy. He also killed her best friend, interestingly enough, who was a Salinger. Yes, that's Salinger. And she was a sociopath who ruined one of her friends' lives because she ruined another one of Gwen's friends' lives because she didn't like her by posting some video where she said something slightly edgy, and it destroyed her life. And she has this obsession with Guinevere. She's a lesbian, and she's been keeping like dozens of pictures of her like naked, and been like molesting her in her sleep over the years. And she's just a complete psycho. So Joe kills her, and you're like, good, you killed that guy. He also kills some sleazy music producer, and etc. And he just kind of he also kills this guy's abusive stepfather. So like individually, all the murders are kind of justifiable because, like you say, you see it from his perspective. You see that his love for Guinevere, even if it's twisted, is very, I think, true, because he does kind of love her despite her faults. And it's more so he doesn't exactly idealize her to the same extent you see in some other works. It's very interesting because you really do, like I said, sympathize with him a lot more than you sympathize with Beck, despite Beck being not as bad a person. And this is kind of something a lot of people get upset about, and this was kind of one of the things that happened with Breaking Bad, where people thought that they called other people scum because people hated Skyler and people liked Walter White. And my thesis for this is Walter White is a better and a worse person than Skyler. And someone described this once. Someone called in and asked, and this is a little, you'll see where this is going from, called the Catholic Answers and asked, does God love the devil? And he said he loves certain things about him because there's a lot of things to admire about Satan. He's intelligent, he's charismatic, he's powerful, he's a good leader. There's a lot of likable things about him, even if the sum total of it is the ultimate evil. And it's kind of like that with Walter White. Walter White is in many ways brave. You can sympathize with him. He's brilliant. He's resourceful, etc. There's all these likable things about him. Whereas with Skyler, there's nothing likable about her. She's just annoying and kind of a bitch. Whereas with Walter White, sure, he's kind of kills a lot of people, some of whom maybe not necessarily deserve it, but there's things to like about him and things to dislike about him. Whereas with Skyler, there's nothing to like or dislike. There's something about a great man, like a Napoleon, or even maybe someone like Stalin, who you kind of have to respect them for their grandeur, even if you disagree with most of what they did. You have to appreciate their will to power, I guess you could say. And that's very much the kind of perspective you get from Joe. So it's interesting because at one point he gets together with this other girl, and they're actually like the perfect couple. Things go really well. But then he just has to go back to Beck because he's obsessed with her. And she kind of seduces him away, and he lets himself be seduced away. And the season ends, and spoiler alert once again, with him killing her because he realizes that she'll never love him, that she's just kind of a thought, and she's the eternal thought. And it's just kind of, who do you ultimately sympathize with? Maybe you could say it's subversive or immoral or whatever to enjoy this show. But it's interesting. And anytime something's interesting and really makes you think morally about whose side you take, what side you're on, that kind of thing, in my view, that's a good thing. So I really like the show. I highly recommend it. I'll talk to you guys later.